Okay, continuing, we're looking at the list of names proposed by Josh McDowell in his book, More Than a Carpenter. And as I said in part 1, I'm willing to go with this list, but with a few caveats noted. Acts chapter 10, verses 40 to 41 suggests the criterion for membership in this group, the died for a lie group, or did they die for a lie group. It has Peter say, quote, God raised Jesus up on the third day and granted that he should become visible, not to all people, but to witnesses who were chosen beforehand by God. That is, to us who ate and drank with Jesus after he arose from the dead. Now, this group should be easy enough to identify, but here's where we begin to see the complications and inconsistencies and other problems that plague this argument start to emerge. So caveat A, it seems that Matthias should be on this list. Acts 1, 21 to 22 identifies Matthias as one of the men who had accompanied the apostles throughout the time Jesus was with them, and it also identifies him as a witness of the resurrection. He was selected, as most of you no doubt know, to fill the place once held by Judas Iscariot among the 12 apostles. However, Acts 1, 22 to 26 constitutes the only mention of Matthias in all of Christian scripture. Subsequent Christian tradition or legend is divided about the circumstances of Matthias's death. It is variously claimed that Matthias died of natural causes in Jerusalem, was crucified in a part of what is now the Republic of Georgia, or was crucified in Ethiopia, or was stoned in Jerusalem but survived the stoning, only to end up being beheaded later on. In short, we don't know why, how, or when Matthias died. At best, this says nothing for or against the apostles wouldn't die for a lie argument. At worst, it militates against the argument, begins to bring into relief a problem that continually plagues this argument, as we will see, and that is, we don't really know what happened to the vast majority of these people. So we're not going to include Matthias on the list, but his inclusion wouldn't help this argument. In fact, it would hurt it, and I suspect that's why Matthias tends not to show up on these lists. Okay, caveat B, with respect to eating and drinking with Jesus after the resurrection, I'm compelled to ask, what about Nathanael of Cana? The 21st chapter of John's Gospel describes what's called, quote, the third time that Jesus was manifested or made visible to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. The risen Jesus is portrayed by John as cooking breakfast for the disciples on a beach at the Sea of Galilee. 7 of the disciples encounter the breakfast-making Jesus on the beach, including one called Nathanael of Cana. The Gospel of John is the only one of the 4 canonical Gospels that mentions Nathanael of Cana. Apologists and others have attempted to solve the problem by claiming that Bartholomew, whose name appears on the list of apostles' names in each of the 3 synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, had another name. Guess which name they said Bartholomew had? Nathanael of Cana, come on down. Nathanael, of course. For example, in the Saints and Angels section of the website Catholics Online, it is asserted, quote, Saint Nathanael is Saint Bartholomew. Nice how that works, huh? It's also worth noting that according to John's Gospel, when Nathanael first met Jesus, Nathanael declared, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. Now, the Jesus of John's Gospel isn't even remotely as impressed or enthused by this as the Jesus of Matthew's Gospel is, when Peter declares that Jesus is the Son of God at a much later period in Jesus' ministry, but that's a matter for another video. The bottom line is that Christian tradition or legend merely asserts that Bartholomew and Nathanael of Cana are the same person. For the sake of time, I'll accede to legend or tradition by placing Nathanael's name next to Bartholomew's on our list. This brings to the foreground the fact that the four canonical Gospels and the book of Acts don't always agree on the names of the apostles. For example, in addition to the Bartholomew-Nathanael discrepancy, there is the Thaddeus-Judas discrepancy. The Gospels of Mark and Matthew each list someone called Thaddeus among the 12 apostles, but have only one Judas, namely Judas Iscariot. The listings in Luke and Acts do not include Thaddeus, but do include someone called Judas, son of James, in addition to Judas Iscariot. John's Gospel, which never mentions the names of all 12 apostles, refers to someone called Judas, quote, not Iscariot. You won't be surprised to discover that the Christian tradition or legend works its assertive magic on this discrepancy too. For example, the Saints and Angels section of Catholic Online simply asserts that Judas or Jude was, quote, known as Thaddeus. Of course, nowhere in the Gospels or elsewhere in the Christian scriptures does anything indicate that Judas, son of James, or more correctly from Greek, Judas of James, was known as Thaddeus. But if one learns anything from the way that Christian apologists tend to deal with contradictions among their sacred texts, it is that they are ready, willing, and able to ignore what the text does or does not say in favor of fiating contradictions out of existence. The Bartholomew-Nathanael discrepancy, the Thaddeus-Judas discrepancy are but two examples of this sort of bullshit at work. And I'm using bullshit in the sense discussed in Harry G. Frankfurt's excellent book on bullshit. All right, caveat C. What about Cleopas and his unnamed fellow disciple? In the 24th chapter of Luke's Gospel, we encounter a follower of Jesus named Cleopas, who, we're told, on the Sunday after Jesus had been executed, was traveling with another follower of Jesus to the village of Emmaus. The story says that Jesus came along and joined Cleopas and his traveling companion on the road, but, quote, their eyes were prevented from recognizing Jesus. After they conversed for a while on the road, the narrative of the conversation is problematic for a number of reasons, all of which are beyond the scope of this video. Cleopas and his traveling companion importune Jesus to stay with them through the evening. As they prepare to have dinner, Jesus breaks and blesses some bread, and voila! The eyes of Cleopas and his traveling companion are opened, and they recognize that they've been with the risen Jesus all along. Whereupon, quote, Jesus vanished from their sight. Cleopas and his traveling companion hightail it back to Jerusalem to tell the 11 remaining apostles about their encounter with the risen Jesus. And while they were in the middle of the story, according to Luke, Jesus appeared again. After assuring all of them that he wasn't a ghost, Jesus requested and ate a piece of broiled fish. So it seems Cleopas and his unnamed fellow disciple should be included on the list. After all, according to one gospel, they twice witnessed the risen Jesus appearing and had 2 post-resurrection food events with him. However, there's no mention of Cleopas anywhere else in Luke or the rest of the Christian scriptures. No one knows what became of him. Most relevant here is that the circumstances of his death and the death of his fellow disciple are unknown. What is true of Cleopas and his unnamed fellow disciple is true of many of those who the Christian scriptures claim saw and interacted with the risen Jesus. We know nothing, or next to nothing about them. The circumstances of their deaths are unknown. We have no idea whether they faced persecution, much less martyrdom. All right, on to part 3.